Hey, Being in Time, Chapter 5, Number 2, the second part. Let's keep moving. We just finished talking about interpretation. Um, remember that, can I remember what we were talking about? The there, disclosedness, and the two existential constituents of that were attunement and, what was the other one? Understanding. And then interpretation is derived from understanding. That's the background. So we're talking about statement now, and this is based on understanding and is a derivative form of interpretation. So we're just going down the line, if you like. Understanding, interpretation, now we're at statement. So remember, interpretation was that as structure, making the thing explicit, making our understanding explicit. So we could kind of we were aware of exactly what it was and how it worked through that for structure. And the kind of definition which Heidegger gives is that statement is a pointing out which communicates and defines. So there are three things that I just want to draw your attention to. They're pointing out. A statement is a pointing out which lets things be seen from themselves. So this is that embracing that phenomenological phenomenological approach. It's a pointing out. It's going to the things themselves, which communicates. So the idea of communicating to someone. So there's someone else involved here, another Dasein, and defines. So there's predication. So it takes the thing and describes it, talks about it, gives it some, defines it. It's a pointing out which communicates and defines. Cool. The statement, being derivative of interpretation, is also, therefore, necessarily built on the threefold for structure, as all interpretation is. So we've got, remember we had the for having, foresight, for conception. The for having of statement is something disclosed in general in the mode of determining based on a background practical understanding of the world. So that, remember that still talking about that background context in which the thing that we're referencing in the statement is appearing. Foresight, in the sense that the predicate is loosened from the being itself to be made explicit. So it's again just drilling in, focusing in a little bit, taking the thing as it is, defining it, predicating statements, propositions about it. So we're loosening. I like that word. We're loosening what we kind of intuitively understood and understanding. We're loosening and separating out that intuitive understanding and making it explicit regarding a specific object. And foreconception comes in here because the statement always operates within a definite, although restricted, set of concepts. Remember that this is kind of how the thing is to be used, how it fits in to that context, the referential totality, relevance, how it operates within that set of concepts. So interpretation is a primordial act which discloses the world in a circumspect and heedful manner. Cool. Statement is a modification of circumspect interpretation because the being initially heedfully disclosed in forehaving as a useful thing becomes the object of a statement. Something at hand with which we have to do or perform something turns into something about which the statement that points it out is made. So it's just taking that explicitness of interpretation and making it something that can be communicated, making it something that is even more kind of tangible, if you like. Foresight is now directed at something objectively present, and qualities become accessible for the first time. Okay, so I'm just running through how the for structure kind of works with statement. Directed at something, qualities become accessible for the first time. Useful things have no explicit qualities. Their being is given in a primordial unity all at once. Remember that's that foundational attitude Heidegger has towards understanding. Everything is, we don't explicitly, cognitively apprehend things. Initially, that's not our first mode of engagement with the world. Initially, we just in disclosing them, we understand what they're for, how they fit into the referential totality. So the as no longer encompasses a totality of relevance and is cut off from the referential relations of significance that link it to the surrounding world in foreconception. So that's what this as of statement does. It breaks that understanding. It breaks that deeper understanding that we had before. We had before towards the thing, where we just used it, where we engaged with it in that kind of original manner. And now it plucks that thing out of that totality in which we've originally found it and grasped it, and now makes it, reduces it, if I can say that, reduces it to a more abstract conception, something that is no longer part of that totality of relevance, cut off from those referential relations which we were so through which we principally engaged with the thing in the first place. And it gives it meaning in kind of this abstracted way. And so what we have here through statement is that the existential hermeneutical as of circumspect interpretation that understands, still linked with understanding, and is therefore pregnant with possibility, becomes the apophantical as of the statement. So with that we can see that the interpretation was still kind of, it's probably a little bit of an oversimplification, but it's still kind of on the ontological side of things. Still on the ontological side, and it's still connected with understanding. It's still connected with the practical usefulness of the thing. It's an understanding of the thing as the thing. So it's explicit, but it's not it hasn't reduced the thing to just a thing. It hasn't abstracted it out from its the totality of relevance. It's still a part of it, and it still retains those those connections. Statement, on the other hand, doesn't do that. Statement goes a little bit further and reduces that existential hermeneutical as to the apophantical as. It takes it out of that the totality of relevance and makes it something that science can then investigate, removed from any meaningful situation. We can just then describe it without thinking about how it fits in this wider, deeper understanding of being that Heidegger's talking about. So essentially what statement does is cover up meaning. It gives us something objectively present. It lets us see the thing as just something objectively present, as present to hand, rather than as a useful thing or something ready to hand. So that's kind of the stepping down, understanding, interpretation, which are still kind of on the same side, and then we cross over to statement, which now gives us something. So those two, understanding and interpretation, give us something ready to hand, give us a useful thing, let us see the object as a useful thing, and then statement gives us for the first time an objectively present thing, a thing present at hand. Cool. The next part is Dasein and discourse. So this discourse obviously is not going to mean what we typically think it means, or the way we typically define it these days as being something like communication or conversation, discourse. Instead, it is, well, first of all, it's existentially equiprimordial with attunement and understanding. So it forms the basis, along with attunement and understanding, of how Dasein discloses the world. And as a starting point for us, Heidegger talks about discoursing as the significant structuring of the intelligibility of being in the world, and is always discourse about. Okay, so let's just keep rolling with that. Discourse lies at the basis of interpretation and statement because it is the articulation of intelligibility, and it's constitutive for the being of the there. That is attunement and understanding. So I'm basically repeating myself there. Another thing is that it's not about making vocal utterances, which is the usual way we think of discourse, right? It's about being in the mode of discovering world and Dasein itself. So it's not language, but it is the foundation of language. So we have, we have the kind of understanding, interpretation, statement path, which basically makes the object more explicit progressively, until we get from understanding where it's not explicit at all, and to statement where it is completely explicit, that apophantical as of statement. But that is rooted in this other thing, which is at the same level, is equiprimordial with understanding, and that's discourse. So it seems to be the way that we disclose. It's the way that we disclose the world. It's still tied in with that that fundamental attitude, that fundamental approach that this whole chapter is about. Okay, let me give you the 3 essential possibilities for discourse, because I think they clarify things a little bit. The first is listening, right? Unusual for discourse, but as we've already said, discourse is not about vocal utterances. So listening is the existential being open as being with for another. So there's that connection with being with. So it references other beings like Dasein. The second possibility for discourse is hearkening. Heidegger calls hearkening. And this is phenomenally primordial to hearing. It's deeper than hearing, and what hearing is based on. So we never hear sounds, which is to say we never hear the notes and the tones, the individual notes and tones that make up sounds, that make up our hearkening, is what Heidegger calls it. We never hear those sounds first and then identify them. Instead, they come to us fully formed, as it were. And so, if you think about a sentence, someone says something to you, you don't hear the individual phonemes, and then kind of have to pass them together and compile them in such a way that they make a coherent utterance, right? What happens is, as soon as you hear the sentence, it's just grasped as a whole. There is no, they don't reach you like they would a scientific instrument. The scientific instrument does grasp them in that way. It grasps the sound waves as they come in, and the microphone picks them up. All it does is pick up those individual single tones and sound waves, and then it translates them into the sentence or whatever it is. We don't hear things like that, and that's hearing. We don't hear, we hearken, and that means that the sentence that we're listening to, we just grasp it as a whole. It doesn't come to us broken up and then we piece it together. It's just something we grasp fully formed. And so this is, he says, phenomenal proof that Dasein as being in the world always maintains itself together with inner worldly things at hand, and initially not at all with sensations whose chaos would first have to be formed. So that we don't interact with things as the way that science would tell us that we do, right? We have a deeper, more intimate connection with the world around us. That means that we hearken rather than hearing. And the last section here is keeping silent. Again, a strange thing to have in when we're talking about discourse, but this is how we let something be understood, through keeping silent. So those three things hopefully kind of shed a little bit of light on what Heidegger means by discourse. It's just another way that the world is disclosed, or how Dasein discloses the world. It does so through attunement, through understanding, but also through discourse. It's just another aspect of the way that Dasein discloses the world. And the best example, I think, is that idea of hearkening. It just shows how the world is disclosed for Dasein, by Dasein, rather than discovered, if you like. It's not something we discover, it's something we disclose actively. It's an active process. And that's what discourse is. So from there, we're going to break from that a little bit and head in a different direction to the everyday being of the there. So we had that kind of disclosedness. We broke it down into those three elements, and now we're looking at the everyday being of of that being who discloses Dasein. So the first thing is the existential characteristics of the disclosedness of being in the world, the there, in the mode of being of the they. So we're coming back to that kind of anonymous they, which we talked about a couple of videos back. And the everyday being of the they can be broken into three categories, which Heidegger talks about in their connection with discourse, sight, and interpretation. And they make up what he calls entanglement. So this everyday being of the there is the way that we are entangled with the they from the beginning. First is idle talk. And this is communication with only an approximate and superficial understanding of what is being communicated. So idle talk is constituted by gossip and passing the word along, as opposed to discourse. And it can also be passed along in writing, and when it does, it becomes scribbling, Heidegger calls it. So yeah, it's just that superficial. It's superficial discourse. Discourse is a deeper, more fundamental connection with the world. It's a way of disclosing the world, or not authentically. It's probably not right, but it's a way of disclosing the world. It's one of the ways in which Dasein discloses the world, and idle talk is this. It's just a superficial kind of inaccurate way of trying to do the same thing, and it is that way because it is caught up in the they. The second element of entanglement is curiosity, and so in the disclosedness of being in, sight became possible for Dasein and was linked with understanding. We saw that. Heidegger calls the equivalent of sight, as it relates to everydayness, seeing. And this is a way of being that takes care to see not in order to understand what it sees, but only in order to see. So again, just lacking that kind of deeper focus. And curiosity seeks novelty rather than truth, and therefore is characterized by a not staying with what is nearest. Distraction is another central element here. Always kind of looking for the newest thing, the latest thing. And Heidegger gives one final characteristic, that of never dwelling anywhere. Instead, Dasein in this mode is everywhere and nowhere. So it's a real inauthentic way of disclosing the world. And the third aspect is ambiguity. And this is basically seems to be what results from those first two, idle talk and curiosity, ambiguity. And it means that everything is accessible to everybody, and everyone can say nothing about what is encountered. There is no true understanding. All we have is just this inaccurate, superficial, distracted, novel kind of unengagement. Really, that's kind of what the idea is here. It's a way of disclosing that really doesn't disclose anything. And because everything is then ambiguous in this way, it therefore becomes impossible to disclose anything in genuine understanding. So that's entanglement, and that's the everyday being of the there. That's how we are, first of all, in our everyday, in our everydayness, but also it's our original mode of being. So these, as I said in the video about where we talked about the they, these everyday modes of being are not meant to be disparaging in any sense, despite the fact that some of the terms are kind of disparaging, right? Gossip, scribbling, but they're not supposed to be. They're all, well, they're not disparaging in the sense that they're negative, I guess. He says they're all positive phenomena, and they don't reflect the case where Dasein has somehow lost its being and is no longer being in the world. That's not the way to think about this. Dasein is always being in the world, and it can't lose that being, but it can be in it in an authentic, in an inauthentic mode, and that's what this is. So they're inauthentic ways of being, and as such are only possible for a being whose disclosedness is constituted by attuned and understanding discourse. So that's that is how Dasein discloses. But the everyday mode of that disclosure is inauthentic. The everyday and the original mode of that disclosure is inauthentic. Okay, and the final section is falling prey and thrownness. And so falling prey is basically Dasein's absorption in the world as guided by idle talk, curiosity, and ambiguity. Falling prey. It's kind of cool term. But again, remember, this is not a fall from a more primordial or authentic condition. Authenticity is not Dasein's primordial condition. Rather, the grounding of its being in attunement and understanding is. So those we talked about the disclosedness of Dasein, attunement, understanding, and discourse. They are not authentic. They are just the way that the world is disclosed for Dasein. It's not authentic and it's not inauthentic. But first, so once we have that understanding of how Dasein exists, this being, then we can relate to this primordial grounding in either an authentic or an inauthentic manner. And we do it originally, in the first place, in this inauthentic manner. We all do. It's just the way it is, because we're all We all come into being in societies with norms and values and that we didn't establish. And so we originally engage in the world, with the world, in an inauthentic manner. But we're doing it through attunement, understanding, and discourse. Okay, so there are a few things that to mention, three things actually about falling prey. The first is falling prey is a constant temptation for Dasein. And this means that being in the world is in itself tempting. So it's always those things, idle talk, curiosity. They're always a temptation there for Dasein. Falling prey is also tranquilizing because it reassures Dasein that one is leading one is leading and sustaining a full and genuine life, because we're comforted by being with. We're not being with though. We're comforted by following the pack, doing what they do, saying what they say. We're safety in numbers, if you like. So it's tranquilizing in that way, and it's also alienating. This is the third point. It's alienating because its own most potentiality for being in the world is concealed. So it covers over any opportunity Dasein has to be authentic, to take control of its own possibilities. So those three things characterize falling prey: tempting, tranquilizing, and alienating. Nice. But again, Heidegger says falling prey is not a night view of Dasein. Such a view would amount to an ontic property, whereas falling prey is an essential ontological structure of Dasein itself. Cool. So that's it. Chapter 5, done. Yeah. It's nice. I'm going to finish up there. And I'll see you next time for chapter 6. Cool. Thank you. Thanks for listening. See ya.